Notice how you stand and notice where you feel effort in standing. And sense the texture of the mat or the floor underneath you, and get a sense of how your feet are actually making contact with the floor. And does it feel the same on the right foot and the left foot? Or maybe you bear weight differently in one foot. You can feel that the foot makes a different kind of contact. And then from there, travel up your legs and get a sense of if you actually are standing a bit more on one leg, if you feel like your weight is a little bit distributed differently on the right and the left side. And then feel the pelvis, and it really is the structure of the pelvis, the bones, which more or less wrap around from the back underneath to become your pubic bone and wrap around the sides. And sense if one half of your pelvis is a little shifted forward from the other half, or maybe lifted a bit toward your shoulder. Maybe it seems very balanced. Now your spine begins at your tailbone and passes through the back of your pelvis, becomes your low back, your middle back, your upper back, and then your neck. That's all the structure of your spine. So sense the curves of your spine and sense where your head actually sits on the top of your neck. And does it come a bit forward of the neck or a bit back? Maybe it's tilted a bit to the left or the right. And then very gently, your eyes can be open or closed for this. Turn around yourself and see what that feels like. Just standing where you are, just turn around yourself, look to the left and to the right. And notice as you're doing that where you turn from. And then stop. And I'll mention now, and it's a good reminder for all of you, that the game is as much about noticing something specific as it is about noticing what you notice. So now take a little walk around and see what brings your attention when you walk. So less important the specifics, more interesting the general. Do you notice a pain or a sensation? Do you notice a particular part of your body? Do you find it difficult to sense your body? These sorts of things, right? Already getting curious about what is your learning process from the immediate beginning, yeah? Okay, and then walk back over to your place and first lay down on your back without the cushion and have your legs straight and your arms by your side. And if it immediately doesn't feel comfortable to have your legs straight like this, then keep the knees bent and the feet standing. Now, we begin to cross-reference because you just did a basic scan of yourself standing, and you have a certain relationship to gravity when you're standing. In addition, your body is being supported by your feet in that situation. So the area to explore standing is how am I supported by my feet? How do my bones align over my feet, my ankles? Now, in this situation, you have a different relationship to gravity. So now the question becomes, how do you relate to gravity in this situation? So you start by noticing the parts of your body that give their weight fully. You can start with the back of the pelvis, feeling the weight of the pelvis, in particular the left and the right side of the pelvis. And you might notice that one side goes down into the floor a little bit more than the other. And then you can feel the weight of your upper back and your shoulders, and check the left and the right side here. And if there is an asymmetry, is it the same as the pelvis or is it different? Then bring your attention back to the back of your pelvis and listen from the back of the right side of your pelvis to your right heel, and sense the contact points of your right leg. And then bring your attention to the back of the left side of the pelvis and feel from the back of the left pelvis to the left heel and the contact points of that leg. And then start to connect the pieces by bringing your attention to your spine, which again goes from the tail all the way up to the base of your skull in the back, and get a sense of the curves of your spine. And the weight of your head. And then think about some things or something that you noticed when you were standing. And check on that area or areas now that you're laying. And in particular, think of the area that you were using the most effort for standing. And reference that laying down. And notice the way that that area makes contact with the floor. And here you start to get your first clue about your own habitual holding patterns. Now very gently roll your head a little bit to the left and to the right. And sense where that movement's coming from. How far down can you sense that movement? And then leave that. Then bring your attention to your breathing. And try not to control the breathing, but do allow for it to feel as light and expansive as possible without forcing it or doing some kind of yogic breathing. And notice the area that moves the most when you breathe. And then put your hands on the area that you feel the most movement. And continue to breathe into your hands. So again, not stretching or pushing the breath into your hands, but having the clarity of the warmth and the weight of your hands to direct the breathing a little bit more specifically. Now keep your hands where they are, except draw them farther apart by bringing your elbows farther away from your body. So your hands are in the same place, but they're wider apart. And then continue to breathe into the wider diameter of this area that you feel movement. And what's that like? Now consider in this situation on your back, there's 3 clearly available regions for your respiration. And that is the front of the chest, the sides of the chest or the side ribs, and the belly. So notice of those 3 regions where you have your hands, if it's more the chest, more the sides, or more the belly. And then of those 3 regions, notice where you feel the least amount of movement as you're breathing. And put your hands there. And now using the weight of your hands as a guide, again, not forcing the breath or stretching the body to bring in the breath, listen to the weight of your hands and guide your breathing to that area, just gently. See if incrementally the movement in this area can improve just by bringing your awareness there. And now in this area, do the same thing of bringing the hands farther apart, elbows farther away from your body. And then continue to breathe into your hands in this situation. And a few times play with breathing into your hands and then holding the breath, listening for any potential for further expansion. And then when you're ready to breathe out by parting your lips lightly. So it's not a big breath, but it comes gently out through the lips. So you breathe in and you feel the expansion into your hands. And you hold and you listen. And then as you breathe out, you feel the change underneath your hands. And then bring your arms back down by your sides. And listen overall to your breathing again, the first area with prominent movement, the second area with less movement. And now take a few more breaths where you get a sense of filling into both of those areas. Maybe one and then the other, maybe both at the same time. And as you start to receive more volume in the front and the sides, can you sense a response of movement in the back? Is there an echo in your back ribs, your low back area, maybe even the pelvis? And then leave all that and roll onto your left side. You can use one or two cushions or your arm under your head, whatever feels the most comfortable. And organize yourself so more or less your back is not rounded. You can feel that your head is over your pelvis. And then bend your knees in front of you so they're more or less up in line with your pelvis. They might be lower, wherever it's comfortable, but in front of you. And then more or less your feet are under your knees. So you're kind of in a, I don't know, what is that shape? A half square? It's really important that you're comfortable from the onset, because as we begin the lesson and start working with the nervous system, you'll realize that your system is set up to respond to the loudest sound. And this is kind of a blessing and a curse in terms of our daily functioning. So we're immediately alerted if something is uncomfortable. But the byproduct of that is it negates our ability to sense the subtleties, right? So if there's something right now that doesn't feel good, you're going to want to try to adjust that as best you can. So you've already set the place for your learning experience. And essentially, as we continue, the crux of what we're doing, as I said, a process of self-discovery, is refining our own sensitivity. That's really what it comes down to. Okay. Now put your right hand on the floor in front of you and have your left arm wherever it is that it's comfortable. And a few times lift and drop your right hand like it's a stone. And you'll see for yourself, if there's a hesitation, then you're engaging somewhere in your arm. Exactly. So lift and drop it until it really feels heavy, kerplunk. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Then straighten your arm in front of you and keep the hand heavy like you just had it, right? And so with the arm straight, you could even check again. With the arm straight, you could lift it and drop it and make sure that it's still kerplunk heavy. Yeah? Okay. Now, actually for you, Christine, shift back a little bit because in a second you might end up poking him a little bit. Yeah. So for those of you that have done this particular movement before, it becomes even more important to stay focused on what you're doing now and not, oh, I remember how this movement goes, right? Which of course negates the process of being sensitive to what you're experiencing. And that's part of where the game gets more complicated as we become more adept at the practice. So you're going to do a movement of your right shoulder to start and slide your right arm away from you. So keep the right arm straight and start to do a movement of your shoulder, let's say rolling forward being relating to your body. So forward's in front of you. And if you shift or roll your right shoulder a little bit forward, you'll discover that your arm will slide maybe a couple of centimeters forward. And then bring it back to the starting point. Now I want you to compare. Reach or slide your arm forward to the point that you feel a stretch. And make sure that the hand stays super heavy on the floor. So that's the point you don't want to go to. You want to go to the point that you don't feel a stretch. So now come back until there's no stretch feeling. And then have this be your range for starting, okay? So a few times on your own, very gently, start sliding the arm away from you and then back to where you began. And keeping the elbow straight, keeping the hand heavy. And check that the movement is coming from the shoulder, not the elbow, not the forearm, not the biceps. So for starters, the movement might really be very small. But the arm stays straight. Don't bend the moment you bend the elbow, you end up using the muscles around the biceps or the forearm. So it's really a sliding and dragging feeling. That's it. That's it. And now pause for a moment here on your side and relax your arm. As we continue with this lesson, there may be times that you're going to think, I don't know what she means. I don't know how to do that. It's quite common that this happens. And it's not that you misheard or that I didn't explain it properly. It's that you haven't yet figured out how to organize it. And that's a potential moment for frustration, right? So if you find at some point in this lesson that that's happening and you're like, what do you mean? Trust me, I'll repeat myself. I'm watching to see if you're getting confused. Err on the side of pausing, slowing down, even imagining the movement without actually doing it until it starts to make sense what the instruction is, okay? So now go ahead and straighten out the right arm in front of you again with the hand heavy and keeping the arm straight. And now do the opposite movement of bringing the right shoulder back toward the person behind you and watch how the arm slides back toward you. And then come back to the starting position. And the top arm might encounter different textures, might encounter your other arm. Just whatever it is it's touching, just let it slide over whatever surface. That's it. And then check on your breathing. And start to sense your right nostril. And start to sense these areas we just looked at on the back, which was the front of the chest, the side of the chest, and the belly. And now also start to feel the whole side ribs on the right that wrap from the front all the way to the spine in the back. And then start to combine the two movements. So first the shoulder will roll forward, and you could try it on, let's say, an exhale, and the arm will slide away from you. And then as you start to breathe in, you drag the shoulder back, and the arm slides a little bit toward you. And you can feel that your shoulder blade is shifting and it's actually sliding on your ribs. And what else do you notice about how you're doing this movement. And is it easier for you when you bring the arm away from you or when you bring the arm toward you? And then pause for a moment. And feel again where your head is in relation to your neck. And notice, like you notice standing, if your chin is a bit lifted, your head's a bit forward of your neck, maybe your head's a bit back of your neck, maybe it's a bit pinched on one side, if your head is bent a little or your neck is bent a bit to the side. Try to organize yourself so your head is as neutral as possible over your neck. And now do the same movement of reaching the arm forward and back, except this time, how can you use your head to support the movement? So as you reach your arm away from you, can you let your head shift or roll so that your face moves a little bit more toward the cushion or toward the floor? And then when the shoulder drags back and you breathe in, you might feel that your skull rolls a little bit so that your face shifts a bit toward the ceiling. And notice if bringing in the head changes the quality of the movement at all. Okay. And then leave that and rest your right arm. Now bring your attention to your legs and feel how your right knee is stacked on top of your left knee. And your right hip is on your left hip. And start to do a similar action, except this time, instead of the action coming from the shoulder blade, it's going to come from the hip. So start small, yeah, exactly, and start to bring the right hip a little bit forward, and you'll feel the right knee will shift a little bit forward. And then bring the hip back to where it started. Try to keep your legs quiet. They might move, but you're not moving them. Start very small, very slow, until you can get a sense of what it is that you're doing. And for the most part, everything else stays quiet for now, right? We'll build on it, but for now, the ribs and the head and the shoulders are quiet. Just the right hip socket shifting forward until the right knee shifts forward, and then the hip shifts back to where it started. Okay, and then pause. And again, take a couple of breaths and feel the whole right rib cage area from the front wrapping around the side to the back. And then using just the right hip, start to bring the right hip back a little bit toward the floor behind you. And then return to the starting point. And ask yourself if you can reduce the effort. And as you shift the hip back, how far up your body do you feel that movement? And then can you start to combine those two movements So the right hip will shift forward, and you might feel the top leg shifts forward, and then the right hip shifts back. You might notice that it's easier for you to shift forward or back. Again, you can store that information away. That's important data about your habits, which will come up more as we continue. And then pause for a moment and continue to rest here on your side comfortably. And now bring your right hand onto the floor again with your arms straight again. And now can you start to very slowly combine the movements? So as the arm slides away from you, the pelvis rolls forward, the shoulder rolls forward, and the head rolls forward. And then you draw the right hip back and the right shoulder back and the neck and the head back. Yeah. And feel now, as you continue like this on your own, rolling forward and rolling back, notice how the range of motion changes or the quality of the movement changes. And listen to your breathing. And for those of you in particular that are more experienced with this kind of work, here is a very interesting place that you can reference how the movement of your respiration can actually support the movement of the body. And you can investigate that on your own. You can try it one way, you can try it another way. For you guys that have been working with me for a while, I want to be super clear that you should always be open to exploring and playing with things, even if I'm not suggesting it. You know, when we have a mixed group like this, it's important that my instructions are specific and basic. But for you guys that have a little bit more experience, you're welcome to explore on a deeper level. Okay. So pause for another moment on your side. And then to reference it for yourself, now that you started to use your upper and lower body, or more of your whole self for the action, now go back and do the just sliding the arm and see how that's come along. See if there's any difference in how that feels, just sliding the arm. And then leave that. So you can already start to reference what happens is we have a movement pattern situated in our brain. We have a way of doing things. And we simply have to invite some other options into our system, and suddenly, suddenly, we can begin to organize ourselves in a way that's more efficient. Right? So just because your brain got lit up to the functioning of your hip socket, it changed how you were reaching your arm, right, to some degree. And if you're thinking, well, nothing changed for my arm, there'll be other opportunities that you'll be able to reference it probably with more clarity. Okay. So now the last thing here is begin to do a movement of bringing the arm away from you and the hip back. So you're doing the opposite movement. Now go slow so you don't tweak something or you don't start muscling into it. And roll the hip back as you reach the arm forward. And go slow so you know what you're doing. This is an example of something that it sounds simple, but it gets a little bit confusing. So the arm reaches forward, but the hip rolls back. And probably the movement will be considerably smaller because you're asking the body to do two opposing actions. And as you continue to explore this, notice, do you do it at the same time? Or do you reach one and roll the other? See if it's possible. Could you do the movement simultaneously? Could you bring the hip back as you bring the shoulder forward? And listen to if you're starting to grip somewhere around the groin or the low back, belly, somewhere else. And if you are, do less and do less and do less until the movement comes back to being very simple and very easy. Okay, pause for a moment. And then begin again, but do the opposite. So let the hip roll forward as the shoulder rolls back. And go slow, take your time, make sure you're breathing. This is a clue about your postural habits as well. If it's easier for you to bring the arm forward and the hip back, or vice versa. And now, as you continue doing the opposite movement, can you sense the midpoint? So where's the junction that separates what part moves forward and what part moves back? See if you can sense where that's happening. Somewhere on the spine, maybe somewhere on the ribs. Are you still complementing the movement with your breathing? Or do you notice that when you start to focus, you kind of hold your breath gets a little shallow? Okay, pause. And then one last time, for your own reference, just slide the arm away and toward you, and check again if there's any difference in the quality of the movement now that you've brought your awareness to more parts of your body. And then bring in the hip so that you're sliding the arm forward and the hip forward, and sliding the arm back and bringing the hip back. And it's going to start to feel more like a rolling. And then continue the leaning back until you very, very gently roll yourself onto your back again. And you can slide the cushion out of the way and rest on your back with your arms and your legs straight. Bring your attention again to the way that your body settles into the floor. And the right and the left side of the pelvis, the right and the left side of the shoulders. That area from the back of the pelvis to the heels. And start to notice if there's a difference on the right and the left side. Now, this is just the first step, and some of you might be noticing that there's some significant differences, and some of you might be not noticing much of a change at all. For those of you that are feeling something has changed, let me illuminate for you a little bit about what's happening. And that is essentially your body organizes itself to conduct an action the way that it thinks it should, that learned how to do it. Oftentimes, we establish a habit that's not actually supportive of the movement. With these Feldenkrais lessons, we do many things, but on a movement level, we look at the parts, we bring the parts together, we differentiate the parts, and we bring the parts together again. This is a learning process of your nervous system, and in doing it, what happens is the parts of your body that were firing or holding in a superfluous way are literally given an opportunity to stop firing because they're not utilized. So if you feel changes in the quality of the contact of your body and the floor, it suggests that you've begun the process of reorganizing your whole system. And again, if you're thinking, well, I don't feel anything, so my system's not reorganizing. No, it's a learning process. Right? So for you, it might be more pertinent today that you're getting some clarity in your breathing, or that you're actually relaxing, or that you're focusing your attention. Right? It's more, there's all kinds of little rewards along the way, but you have to stay connected to the ultimate concept, which is, can I be present to my experience? Can I start to refine my sensitivity? Now, come back onto your left side again. Same position, the head and the knees in front and the right hand in front. And again, check that you're comfortable. And before we move on to the next step, one more time, slide the arm forward and let the head roll and the ribs roll and the pelvis roll. And then slide the arm back and bring the shoulder back and the head back, the ribs, the pelvis. And listen for yourself, how do you start to use your whole self in that movement? The other reward for the non-reward system is as we begin to improve how we organize ourselves, the movement becomes more pleasurable. So even just the sensation of rolling forward and back can almost begin to feel a bit like a little self-massage, this sort of very gentle, fluid, lulling, rocking feeling. All right. Now, leave that and rest your arms, however, comfortably. And now you're going to start to do a movement of lifting, and I'll say it first. lifting your right knee away from your left knee, but keep your feet in contact. And then bring it back down. And check on your breathing. And notice as you do this movement where you feel effort. And then see if you can, a few times, do half as much to reduce the effort. And you might feel that there's some strain in the hip, maybe the groin. For me, actually, when I do this movement, I end up recruiting my left hip for support. Now, pause for a moment. And a couple times do the movement of just bringing the right hip back like you did in the first place without lifting the knee. Just bring the hip back. Yeah, now start to combine those movements. So at the same time as you lift the knee, can you also adjust or move the right hip? Maybe there's a different way that you could move your hip that would help supporting the lifting of the knee. Maybe lifting the leg higher is actually easier than lifting it less. So play with it a little bit and get curious about how you can support the lifting of the knee with the movement of your pelvis. And as you do that, how high up your body do you feel? Is it possible that the knee can become very, very light? Is there anywhere that you're inhibiting the movement that you don't need to be? It's not actually supporting, that's a parasitic action. And what about the ribs? What do you feel in your ribs when you do this movement? Good. So take a rest there on your side. And again, reference your breathing. Now, some of you might notice that when you listen to the movement of your side ribs and breathing, there's a little echo in your right hip. Now, you can imagine that movement, it was like a hinge, like a door, and the hinge was, let's say, at your feet. Now the hinge is going to be at your knees. So this time you're going to keep your knees together and lift your right foot away from your left foot. And go slow, again, so that you don't strain and you know what you're doing. And notice if you're straining it all in the front of the foot or the toes. Where can you reduce the effort? And now listen to what you feel in your hip. Can you start to bring in movement in the hip that supports this situation? So you can play with it. You can try doing the same movement you were just doing for the other movement of the hip. Or you can try doing the opposite. Maybe the hip shifts forward slightly. Maybe the hip shifts in the direction of your shoulder or away from the shoulder. And keep checking if you're starting to grip around the muscles of the low back or the groin. Always take a pause yourself if you feel like you're starting to effort or you're getting repetitive or automatic. And just stay curious. Are you supporting the movement with your breathing? How far up can you sense this movement? And in particular, remember that junction, right? We were rolling the hip back and the shoulder forward and vice versa. Remember that junction. Okay, and then pause on your side. And then start to combine the movements in a very fluid, easy way, just your comfortable range of motion, so that first you lift the knee, and then you lower it, and then you lift the foot. And maybe the shoulder's involved, maybe the head's involved. The ribs, breathing. A couple of times, do half as much as what you're doing right now. Half as fast, half as big. And then leave that and rest on your side there, whatever's comfy. Now, this last movement variation could at first seem tricky, for some of you. So again, not only try not to force it, but definitely notice if you're having to stop yourself from forcing it, because that's important information about your learning process. Right? So now keep your knees in contact, but do a movement of just lifting your top heel away from your bottom heel. You can keep the top of your feet in contact and just a movement in the ankle that lifts and lowers the top heel. It doesn't have to be a big movement, it doesn't have to be a strong movement, it doesn't have to be a fast movement. Now something interesting is happening here, because as the knees stay connected, you lose the access to your hip and your ribs and your shoulder and your head. And this movement can be a bit painful for some people, so you want to make sure there's no pain there, because what's happening is you're shifting your ankle and you're actually rotating the bones in your lower leg into the joint of your knee. So it's a bit of a precarious, tricky movement, and you want to do that really gently. Notice if there's muscle groups higher up that are trying to fire to support that movement. And again, if they are, try to keep it very small, very simple, very comfortable, even if you're only imagining the movement. And then take a rest here on your side. And now go slowly and listen to what it is that you're doing. Keep your heels connected, but start to rotate the toes, the top toes, away from the bottom toes. And just stay in your comfortable range. Notice if there's any efforting around other muscles of the foot that aren't actually supporting the movement. And just lifting the top part of the foot away from the bottom top part of the foot. The right top foot away from the left top foot. And particularly if there's something about that sensation that is unpleasant or uncomfortable or painful, maybe do less variations, do it slower, do it smaller. And listen to what you feel in your knee as you do this movement. Okay, leave that. And then combine those two movements. So keeping the knees together, alternate lifting the heel away from the heel, and then the upper foot away from the upper foot. And what do you do? What do you do in this situation? How do you deal with it? What's your process in your mind? Do you think, to some degree, I want to do this right. I want to get this. Maybe you feel, I don't care anymore. Why are we doing this? Maybe you just find yourself drifting off, thinking about other things. And the movement be very smooth. And then leave that, and a few times go back to the previous movement of keeping the feet connected, but lifting the knee, and then bringing the knee down and lifting the lower leg. And feeling, what do you do in your hip? What do you do in your side ribs? What do you do with your breathing? And then leave all of that and very gently roll onto your back and straighten out your legs and your arms. Maybe move the cushion to the side so you can feel the weight of your skull on the floor. Sense the length of each of your legs. Feel the contact points around your back ribs, your shoulders, back of your pelvis. Very gently roll your head a little bit to the left and to the right. And then bring your attention back to your breathing and remember where you'd felt the prominent movement, where you'd felt the restricted movement. Now, of course, we've only done one side, and I chose to do that deliberately today, um, as we do sometimes in the Feldenkrais method, uh, as an opportunity to illuminate the difference between the left and the right. If that seems like torture to some of you, then you can roll onto your other side, and probably what will happen is if you move through some of the variations you remember, your body's already organized itself on the right side. So generally, when you switch sides, your body remembers how to organize itself. So you might choose to roll on your other side and work through a few of the variations. Check that you don't skip through them now that you know what you're doing, right? Alternatively, you might just enjoy resting on your back. You might want to go back and revisit some of the movements that you did on this side. As usual, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes or so for your own exploration, your own rest, whatever you'd like to do. My suggestion is that when you finish, come back to standing and turning and walking around and compare what you notice in those situations. And take your time. We'll stay quiet so you can have your own space and your own time, and then we'll reconvene for some smoothies. So thank you.